everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Leigh, and here I do art, I talk about art, I do lightbox videos. We have a good time. Today's video, well, it's been a minute since I've done one of these, but it is a weird art video. Yeah, you heard that right. So if you don't know what that means, I do videos on haunted art, cursed art, weird tales from art history, etc. I will pop that playlist up here, and if any of that sounds interesting to you, I would love it if you would subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, leave a comment. All those things help my tiny little channel out. Thanks for being here, and I will say sit back and buckle in, because today's story is a doozy. We're gonna hop into our weird art time machine and head back to the Philippines and France in the late 1800s. Several weeks ago, I was searching Google to see if I could find any new or interesting haunted or cursed artworks, as one does. Lo and behold, I did find something I had never seen before. It was a painting, and according to the article, it was said to be cursed. This is the painting I found, and it is called Mi Novia, or simply, in English, Portrait of a Lady. It was painted by a very famous Filipino artist named Juan Luna. Despite his fame in art history, I had never heard of Juan Luna before, which surprised me because I've at least usually heard of the name. As far as this painting, Mi Novia, goes, it apparently had a long history of being cursed. So before we jump into the facts of the story, let's talk about the potential of this painting being cursed. Now, I'm of two minds about this allegedly cursed painting. On the one hand, there has been a string of misfortunes, bad occurrences, and even death associated with people who owned or interacted with the painting, supposedly. Taken together over time, it's easy to see how someone who is superstitious or who believes in curses or the paranormal can be led to believe that these bad occurrences are the result of some terrible force within the painting. However, on the other hand, it can be argued by a skeptic that all of the bad occurrences this painting has brought about could also be attributed to simply living life. By that I mean all the misfortunes, illnesses, or deaths that befell people who interacted with this painting are all things that occur simply from being alive. Because as we all know, bad things happen, and they're not usually predictable or planned for. The fact that this painting is a constant in these supposed misfortunes could be chalked up to an understanding of the difference between correlation and causation. What that means is, in the scientific community, when you're testing a hypothesis or asking a question, you can say that one event is correlated with something, which means they go together, but the one thing cannot be proved to cause the other. So, for example, you can say that the painting Portrait of a Lady is associated with several people having bad things happen to them, but you can't necessarily prove that the bad things were caused by the painting. The painting didn't drive a car and crash into another one, or inject someone with an illness, etc. It's just a canvas with paint on it. So it really seems like the mysterious story surrounding this painting can be chalked up to you. Do you believe in the supernatural? Do you believe in curses? Do you believe that something within an object can contain negative forces that affect what happens outside the object? And all that really depends on if you are a believer or a skeptic. In my opinion, of course. So with all that said, you may be surprised to learn that the fact that this painting is cursed is not the most interesting part of this story. What's more interesting than an alleged curse is the fact that the darkness within the painter of this painting is a story that is all too familiar. A story that involves lies, jealousy, anger, and yes, murder. So whether or not you were interested in the painting being cursed or haunted, you may find as you listen to the story of Juan Luna that the really fascinating part is that he was a man with immense talent and opportunity who may have used both to literally get away with the murder of someone he was supposed to love. Juan Luna was born in a northern Philippines town called Badoc on October 23, 1857. He was born to Joaquin Luna de San Pedro y Posada and Lorena Novicio y Anqueta, and was one of 5 brothers, the others being Manuel, Jose, Joaquin, and Antonio. As adults, all 5 boys went on to become very successful in their fields. Manuel was a violinist, Jose a physician, Joaquin a politician, and Antonio a writer and army general. Most biographies mention that he was the 3rd of 7 children, but articles only seem to mention the 4 brothers I mentioned. I'm not sure why the discrepancy. Maybe the other 2 were girls? At any rate, the family moved to Manila when Luna was young, and he attended school there, eventually making his way to the Manila Academy of Fine Arts. He showed a talent for art at an early age, and it seems his artistic endeavors were supported by his family and some prominent artists he interacted with. In 1877, his parents sent Juan and his brother Manuel to Spain to attend the San Fernando School of Fine Arts in Madrid, where Juan excelled, winning academic prizes and taking private lessons. To say he was developing his artistic talent was a bit of an understatement. And his young adult years were spent winning art prizes and creating some of his most well-known paintings, especially once he moved to Rome. He was a rising star in the art world, but that doesn't mean the old starving artist cliche didn't apply to him. In Rome, he lived and worked on Via Maguta, a dirty alleyway where people would park their horses throughout the day. So you can imagine the smell. He was incredibly poor, yet still managed to paint The Death of Cleopatra, a painting that helped launch him into a better life. It won the silver medal at the Madrid Exposition Nacional. He was then hired by the Spanish government to produce a painting and received monthly pay. After this, he created Spoliarium, his most famous painting, which won 3 gold medals at the 1884 Madrid Exposition. While this painting was in progress, people knew about it and were interested in its progress. And people were at his studio day and night, just watching him paint. It was a huge painting named after the arena in Roman amphitheaters where fallen gladiators were stripped of their armor and weapons and then prepared for burial. It was a pretty graphic painting and had a lot of political and social meaning behind it as well. After this, he then moved on to better studios, and by 1885, he painted out of an atelier in Paris, France, that became a hangout spot for other Filipino artists, while he continued to display critically and publicly acclaimed paintings. It's at this point in the story that I will introduce you to Maria de la Paz Pardo y Tavera, known simply as Paz. She grew up in Paris. Her family were very wealthy, Filipinos of Spanish nobility, who had self-exiled from the Philippines to Paris. Paz was described as elegant and sophisticated, and spoke both French and English. Paz had 2 brothers, Felix and Trinidad, who knew of this ambitious and talented painter who had moved to Paris and was causing a bit of a stir. He hung out with all the artistic and intellectual Filipinos in Paris and seemed like a good match for their sister. Only one person was against the match of Juan and Paz, and that was Paz's mother, Juliana. It took some convincing, but she eventually agreed that the 2 could marry. And they did in September of 1886, when Juan was 29 and Paz only 21. The next year, 1887, Paz gave birth to their son Andres, who was the apple of Juan's eye. But soon after, Paz suffered a miscarriage, and this began a series of struggles for the new family. Juan moved his family, fearing his inability to support them on the earnings of an artist. Juan and Paz settled in at the 26 Villa Dupont, 48 Rue Perglise. The household included Paz's mother, Juliana, where she could keep a watchful eye over her daughter and her grandson, but she also provided all the financial support for the whole family. Here, the story just spirals downward, unfortunately. Juan, already a tightly wound man with a hair-trigger temper, must have felt an immense dent to his pride at home. And the fact that he couldn't support them, but his wife's mother could, caused a very tense atmosphere. Then Paz gave birth to a little girl, Maria, nicknamed Bibi, who would sadly die just a few short years later. Her death caused the already struggling couple to break down even further. Juan was devastated at the death of his daughter, and Paz started to experience health issues. On top of this, not long after the death of Bibi, Juan Luna's father also passed away. Adding to all of this stress was the doctor's suggestions for Paz's health troubles. She struggled with asthma and was having a particularly bad time of it. Her doctors prescribed her to visit the thermal waters of Mondore. She left her Paris home with her son Andres and a nanny. Luna had an important commission to work on, so he could not go, but he begged Paz to write him daily. Luna wrote Paz nearly every day, pouring out his feelings and the difficulty he was having accepting Bibi's death, and also his intense anxiety about anything happening to Andres.
Here's an excerpt from a letter that Juan wrote to Paz on August 8, 1892. Quote, "My Xixing, to your Lulu, you are always the most beautiful of them all, and I ardently long for your return so I can paint your portrait as I would like to, while the weather remains warm. And do you know how I would like to paint your portrait? Answer me on this subject so I may know if you have guessed correctly. Now that your body is beautiful, let us take advantage of our time, because after we will become old, and goodbye to beauty."
It seems he was bearing his soul to his wife in these letters. And that's why it must have been torture for him when Paz didn't return the favor. She was not nearly as faithful in her letter writing, with her letters dropping in frequency from nearly every day to just every few days. Why was Paz so distant? What caused her to not be the listening ear when her husband was so clearly in distress? Well, it seems Paz was unfaithful in more than just her letter writing, and was likely confiding her thoughts to someone else in Mondore. You see, after she had arrived, the rumor mill in the area swiftly began turning, as everyone seemed to be whispering that the married Mrs. Luna had become uncomfortably close to a Monsieur Dusac. It was so obvious, apparently, that Paz had become unfaithful that an anonymous letter writer decided to contact Juan and let him in on the scandalous nature of Paz's
alleged affair.
The person who wrote the letter was not named publicly, but it is widely agreed that it was none other than Paz's nanny, an Englishwoman named Miss Bosley. He immediately ordered Paz to return home, but it seems the damage was past repair. He noticed little things that fueled his fire right away. Paz no longer affectionately referred to him as Lulu, and she had already replaced her mourning black dresses from the recent death of Bibi to bright colored cheery ones. She also started spending a lot of her time in solitude. Now, I wasn't able to find a whole lot about Monsieur Dusac. I looked for photos of him and I didn't really find anything, although it seems that he was a well-regarded person. Chevalier Christophe Maurice Dusac was knighted, and that's why I say he seemed to be a very well-regarded person. He had several businesses in Cuba, and he was president of the French Chamber of Commerce. And he spoke perfect Spanish. He was described as an elegant man and was about 44 years old at the time of these events. He was from a wealthy merchant family in Bordeaux, and he actually made, according to reports, a surprise visit to the Luna residence, where he offered to knight Juan Luna for some reason. That occurred on September 4th, 1892, so just a couple of weeks before all of the events happened with Juan and Paz and Juliana. He also presented Juan with a bicycle that had inflatable tires, which was apparently one of the first of this type. Juan was not swayed. He was not impressed. He was actually, this helped to stoke the flames of his jealousy. He said, quote, "Monsieur Dusac's familiarity with my son shocked me, and when he spoke of my talent and the possibility of having me knighted, my eyes opened wide. I questioned my wife, but she answered that she only had a social relationship with Monsieur Dusac, as is the case in casinos. I told her that one had to be careful with these kinds of relations." Unquote. So there were some reports that when Paz was in Mondore and was meeting with Monsieur Dusac, one of the places at Mondore that was a very popular place to go was the casino, and that she had gone there either to meet him or with him, and that is why the casino is mentioned. Madame Charlotte was the concierge at 25 Rue de Montaubourg. Monsieur Dussac rented the apartment on the ground floor of that building. And apparently, according to court testimony, Madame Charlotte was paid 30 francs a month to, quote, clean up after each rendezvous that occurred in that apartment. I'll leave rendezvous to your imagination. Apparently, Madame Charlotte was somebody who liked to tell about the things that she saw and heard. So she was more than happy to give her side of the story once she was asked to testify in court. So according to her, this is what happened. On September 7th, she was told to leave the door of his apartment open. At around 3:30 in the afternoon, a tall lady in black made her way in. The lady in black stayed for 2 hours. At the trial of Juan Luna, Madame Charlotte did not spare any detail. A journalist covering the trial wrote, quote, with less embarrassment than one would imagine, she revealed the sordid details of the mutually adulterous love affair of Monsieur Dussac and Madame Luna. It was a love affair in which it seemed like anything could happen next. Another journalist mentions, quote, the undone bed, the bidet, dirty waters in basins and towels on the floor, unquote. On September 10th, 1892, was the day that Juan wanted to confirm his suspicions, so he decided to accompany Paz on one of her excursions. Remember, she said when she came back from Monterey, she wanted to have more solitude, and she would go on these solitary walks. Well, Juan went with her this day, and as they were walking, according to the trial notes, she suddenly remembered that she had an appointment with her seamstress. They parted ways, but a few seconds later, Juan's curiosity got the best of him and he decided to follow her, and that he did, as she made her way to a double-decker horse-drawn bus that Luna also hopped on, and she eventually made her way to Rue du Mont-Tabor. She stopped in front of number 25 and then went inside. He went after her and explained that he was looking for the lady in black. According to Madame Charlotte, she said there was no lady in black, and if he didn't leave, that she was going to call the police. She then went to Monsieur Dussac's apartment to warn Paz, saying, quote, Madame, there is a little man in the building who is looking for you. My God, said Madame Luna. It's my husband. Look out the window, urged Madame Charlotte, and Paz did so and said, it's him indeed. So then Luna apparently was in the hallway. He was looking through the building trying to figure out which, place his wife had gone to, when the door opened, the entrance door, to reveal a man wearing a top hat. After a brief moment of surprise, the man extended his hand to shake Juan Luna's hand, and Juan Luna instantly recognized Monsieur Dussac. He said, what, you here? You live here then? And Dussac answered, no, I came to see a friend. The two shook hands, but this pretty much sealed the deal for Juan Luna. He had determined that his wife was having an affair with Monsieur Dussac. The next day was when he would try to force her to confess at gunpoint, and then basically this is when everything seemed to spiral completely out of control. He became more and more angry and violent until the events of the fateful day of September 22nd, 1892, which was just a little more than a week after this encounter had taken place. Upon receiving this confirmation of his suspicions that his wife was straying from him, it seems Juan Luna began a journey down into jealousy, paranoia, and suspicion. Not a good journey for someone who already had a violent hair-trigger temper. And then he proceeded to violently beat her several times in the days that followed. Despite the terror she must have felt, Paz never did confess to cheating, only that she no longer loved Juan. Witnessing what was happening to her daughter, Paz's mother, Juliana, became frightened for her daughter's life. So she begged her son, Trinidad, to intervene. It may surprise you to learn, as it did me, that there exists a letter written by Paz's mother, Juliana Gorricho, to her son, Trinidad, just one day before the murder of herself and her daughter, Paz. This letter and the contents of this letter are absolutely heartbreaking for many reasons, but once you hear the contents of the letter, knowing that Juliana was trying to basically save her daughter, failed in that regard, is just really awful to think about. And I will read you excerpts of this heartbreaking letter right now. Wednesday, September 21st, 1892. Paris. Dear Trinidad, I think it's a crime on my part to allow Paz to leave with Luna, since you cannot imagine how hot-headed this man is, how insolent and shameless he is. He is without shame, because not only did he dare to invite people to lunch and eat without remembering that he lives off his wife's money, but also that he dares to support his brother Antonio and give his parents Paz's money. And for this reason, I deserve to have some regard and respect. Well, no sir. He gets so angry and worked up about things that do not matter. He is beside himself and screams like a beast. He is uneducated, disrespectful of whoever he is with. These angry scenes I did not tell you about until after they were married. Pasita, Paz, has many faults, but she does not deserve to be corrected this way. I see that this marriage is not going well, and much more so as when this man explodes, and when he scolds. He becomes frantic and goes out of his mind. In a word, he turns into a brute. There is no other way to say it. I do not think it appropriate that we let Paz die by giving her to this man who is a brute. I have no hesitation in saying that he is a brute. Never in my life have I seen something like this. And it is my duty to broach this question in view of the fact that Paz continually tells me, quote, Mama, for the life of me, I cannot love this man anymore. I hate him with all of my soul. Nothing will make me love him. And I can never love him. And for all of this, I suffer for my son. She goes on to say, you do not know what happened at home. This man got so angry that he hit her. He threw several things at her. He hit her again. And that did not even satisfy his anger. So he ran to find his revolver. She cried out for help to Antonio, and I locked the door to the room. Imagine my anguish. He went for the revolver, and I heard him knocking at the door. I did not want him to open it, and I started crying and crying, as I have never cried. And in the midst of that anguish, I did not know what to do. He shouted, quote, if you do not open this door, I will break it down. In all this chaos, I had no recourse but to call for Antonio. He answered me and said, quote, open the door, he is not carrying the gun, unquote. I opened and he entered and he started to beat Paz with more fury until Antonio took her by the hand to lock her in a room that belonged to the Englishwoman. But when Juan took her away, he went out to chase them and throw her down the stairs. And I went to hold her. With all this wrath, he was not satisfied. Tell Paz to come here, he said. I want to make her work. Then Juliana goes on to describe to her son what this work consisted of. He, Juan, made her unpack all of her bags, and he separated the clothes that he wanted and threw the rest in the fireplace and set it on fire. He removed the gold initials from Paz's glasses and threw them away, and then he burned her new summer coat, burned several piles of clothes and other things, and Paz, kneeling in front of the suitcases, took things out, and when they were out, he sent them back in once again. In this, she said, I cannot do it anymore. But this inflamed him and made him angrier. Do it. I want it, he said. And she did, broken as she was. And then she had to remove the clothes and put them back in again. He made her repeat this for all of the suitcases. When everything was over, he took what he wanted and burned it in Andres' room. And there, everything lies burned. She tells Trinidad, now, as this marriage has not gone well from the very beginning, but rather is getting worse by the day, and taking into account that this man is very angry, it is my duty as a mother to intercede for her because, as you will understand, she cannot do anything because she is like a prisoner held incommunicado. Antonio himself told me that his brother was so furious that if it had not been for him, he would have killed her this time. To make sure this does not happen, it is absolutely necessary to go, without hesitation and right away, to the best lawyer to consult on whether Paz could divorce and take Andres with her, because if not, it will be a disaster. Do not forget to tell the lawyer that she has kept her money all this time. Believe me, this marriage causes me nothing but fear at every step. I warn you with what Paz told me yesterday. Mama, I beg you, do not say anything about what happened to Trinidad or any of the family so as not to upset them. I also warn you of the other time when, with great displeasure, Luna forced Paz into signing a paper which said she had carnal relations with so-and-so. Of course, he made her write, threatening her with the revolver, while I trembled and cried, shouting to Paz to sign for God's sake the paper, as certainly my poor daughter defended herself energetically, not wanting to sign it because she said that she had never had such carnal relations. She goes on to say, I repeat, for all the love you have in your life, take it to heart. You must see to it that this separation takes place, because sooner or later, he will kill her. And he is so vengeful and insatiable in his anger that I fear in taking this step, he might do something barbarous. Of course, this you will do with great caution, because this man is brutal. I am so full of fear that I would not want to be alone here, at home, for fear that he will commit some atrocity on my daughter. For the first time in my life, I order you, because my daughter's life is in danger. I will pay for the lawyer, whatever the cost. And that's why I want the best one. Do not take this lightly, because this is about your sister's life. And if this is not done, you will remain disgusted with yourself, and this will torment your conscience. I cannot take this step because I am afraid to leave this house, since in my absence he can do any sort of barbarity, so I cannot personally go talk to you. Your mother, Juliana Gorricho. P.S. I have begun to write this letter at 4 a.m, so that nobody knows. Antonio told me yesterday, oh, if Trinidad comes to know about this, he will beat her to death. I replied that you would not do such a thing, because you are opposed to beatings and martyrdom. Unfortunately, the part we will get into next will show you that despite the fact that Juliana wanted desperately to try to save her daughter Paz from her husband Juan Luna, she was unable to do so, and in fact, not only was her daughter killed at the hands of Juan, but also Juliana herself was murdered the very next day. It seems that although Paz herself did not admit to having an affair, it was a well-known secret among her family. Her brothers both later spoke on record about Paz's indiscretions. Trinidad stated that he had originally took Luna's side against Paz when he was first aware of the affair, and even spoke to Luna about defending his honor in a duel against Dusic. But that didn't last once he saw Luna's violent behavior toward his sister increase, and he even had a confrontation that, unfortunately, wouldn't make much of a difference. Paz's other brother, Felix, also let his discovery of the affair be known. He once refused to hug her because in his eyes she was at fault for the affair, and he was worried that she would, quote, tarnish their good name. So both of Paz's brothers were very aware of what was happening between Juan and Paz, and were struggling to decide where their loyalties lay. It became clear to them by the middle of September 1892, not long after Paz returned from Montdore, and the news of why she was called back became well known, that their sister's life was potentially in danger. After Juliana spoke to them about protecting Paz from Juan, things unfortunately did not improve. On September 22nd, Juliana, Paz, and little Andres locked themselves in an upstairs bathroom in their home when it became clear Juan was on a rampage and was not likely to calm down anytime soon. What happened was that the brothers, Trinidad and Felix, had gone to get tea at a cafe not far from the home. Paz and Juliana decided they didn't feel safe in the house alone, so they set out to meet Trinidad and Felix at the cafe. But before they could leave, they encountered Juan. When they realized he was after them, they raced upstairs to the second floor bathroom and locked themselves in. Juan must have decided that this was his chance. He tore through the house looking for Paz and encountered the locked bathroom door. Juliana refused to open it, and Juan vowed to get his gun. Both women, understandably frightened, began to scream for help. Felix and Trinidad, returning from the cafe, heard the screams and ran to help, but they were not faster than Juan. Juan somehow got through the door and found his wife, mother-in-law, and little son barricaded inside, and proceeded to do the unthinkable. He shot Juliana in the head, killing her instantly. Then he shot Paz, also in the head, but she did not die. Felix arrived to the scene, and he was shot as well, although he did survive. Paz was rushed to the hospital, where she died 11 days later on October 3rd, 1892. A trial swiftly followed, as there was little doubt as to what had occurred. Juan killed 2 people. However, this was in 1892, so things were different than they are today. To begin with, the law was very forgiving to a man who kills an adulterous wife. It wasn't exactly a pardonable offense, but the punishment was often very light. At Juan Luna's trial, the affair was much discussed as the motive behind the murders. Even though the letter Juan received initially telling him about the affair had been anonymous, the supposed writer, Ms. Bosley, did not testify in the trial, but the president of the court did read her deposition, which detailed the adultery that had occurred between Paz and Dusa during Paz's stay at Montdore. The newspaper La Época, published on February 8th, gave some further details. Quote, "The weapons. Forensic experts gave precisions on the reach of the revolver used by Luna." Unquote. Apparently, the women were shot at close range, which meant that Juan had made it through the bathroom door and did not shoot through the keyhole as some reports suggested. Quote, "The majority of the witnesses state that the character of the painter's wife was both restless and haughty." Unquote. Whatever that means. Quote, "The president reads the declaration of the nanny of Luna's child, which confirms the adultery of Paz with Dusa, and quote, Trinidad Pardo, the brother of Paz, declares that he always understood that Luna was right and said that he once advised his sister to declare the truth and repent." Unquote. Juan's defense centered around his discovery of the affair and implied that this had pushed him to the brink. But he also strangely claimed that the bathroom scene was a setup. He insisted that the women locking themselves in the bathroom was done on purpose to encourage a divorce that was being set up to ultimately separate him from his only remaining child, so soon after the death of his daughter and his father. A divorce that would also take away Paz and Andreas when he was in his most vulnerable state. Wildly, this seemed to make the court sympathetic to him, even with the prosecution condemning his decision to take 2 lives. What's interesting about the trial, in addition to the legal precedent at the time that murdering an adulterous wife is justified, and let's not even get into the domestic violence that occurred not only in this case, but rampantly, of course, was that the reporting on the trial seemed to take different slants depending on where the reporting was coming from. And even now, as I was researching this case, the information you find is wildly slanted. If you simply type in Juan Luna or Juan Luna biography, you will mostly find information on Luna's art, his politics, and his accomplishments as a revered Filipino artist. The murder of his wife and mother-in-law in these articles is simply a line or two, if it's even mentioned at all. It's not until I started digging deeper, typing in Paz Pardo's name, Mi Novia, or other terms, aside from Juan Luna, that the more detailed information about the murder began to appear. It seems that Juan Luna is one of the Philippines' most revered art history figures, and to muddy that by going into detail about his violent temper and murderous actions is frowned upon in many outlets. Even an auction listing on Christie's auction site for a Luna painting is simply glowing, referring to his brushstrokes and choices of colors, and his social and political statements in some of his works of art, and not once mentioning that he also killed 2 women in cold blood. So back to the trial. Depending on what language the information was translated from during the trial, depended on how it was interpreted. For example, Paz's family lawyer stated during the trial that Paz did in fact commit adultery, but the Spanish translation of his statement translates to, she was accused of disrespecting her husband, while the original report of the trial in French reads, it's a very grave fault. She cheated on her husband. In the end, on February 7th, 1893, Luna was acquitted of all the charges on the grounds of temporary insanity. In order to pay the Tavera family, one report said around 40 francs, a pittance, and another said 1,651 francs, still a pittance for 2 lives. And one even said 1 franc for each charge. So no matter what the actual amount was, basically he just had to pay a little bit of money and boom, he was done. Despite the acquittal, the prosecuting lawyer stated, quote, Luna may have found himself above the justice of humans, but not above that of God. He will forever hear in his mind a voice that whispers to him, killer of women, murderer, unquote. According to reports, though, Juan left the courtroom to an ovation, and after he left the building, he casually went to dinner with his son, Andres, his brother, and some friends. Within 5 days, he left France with his son and moved back to Madrid for a time. From there, he traveled to Japan, returning to his homeland at the outset of the Philippine Revolution. Once there, he was soon arrested on suspicion of collaborating with the Filipino rebels and imprisoned. He was acquitted and traveled to Spain to act as a representative of the fledgling Philippine Republic. Luna died in Hong Kong on December 7, 1899. News had reached him of his brother Antonio's assassination by soldiers loyal to General Emilio Aguinaldo. He was only 42 years old. At first, he was buried at the Happy Valley Cemetery, but his remains were exhumed in 1920 and kept in the house of his son, Andres. Later, they were transferred to a niche at the crypt chapel of San Agustin. His son Andres later became the famous architect Andres Luna de San Pedro, who designed and constructed the Crystal Palace Arcade, among other buildings. The Taveras tried to wash their hands of Juan, with Trinidad deciding to burn all of the Luna paintings in his possession, and for years there was to be no Luna painting in any Pardo de Tavera household. The famous spoliarium was given to the Philippines by the Spanish government in 1953. As a gesture of goodwill, and it landed at the National Museum. Strangely, in order to transport it, they decided to cut the canvas into 4 pieces. The cuts are still visible today. Now, we arrive back where we started, the cursed painting Mi Novia. The first thing to address with this painting is the subject. The original title of the painting was apparently Paz Pardo de Tavera, but the woman in the painting looks nothing like Juan's wife Paz did. The woman in the painting is fair-skinned with brown hair, while Paz looked very Filipina, with much darker skin and more masculine features than the painting subject. So clearly the woman in the painting is not Paz. So who the heck did Juan paint? Well, according to Juan's own notebooks, it was a French woman named Angela Duché, a favorite painting model of his. So with that mystery being solved, on to the curse. The first weird thing is that the portrait of a lady somehow ended up in Manila, even though Trinidad had burned Luna's paintings after he was acquitted. Once it turned up, it passed through several owners, and a story began to follow it. Manuel Garcia, the first owner of the painting, was a successful businessman who went bankrupt after bringing the painting home, and he was forced to sell it. Betty Bantang Benitez, the next owner, died in a car crash on her way to Tagaytay with the former Secretary of Education, O.D. Campos, who survived the crash. The painting was then bought by Tony Nazareno, who then experienced health and financial issues. He sold the painting to Jaime Marcos, and if you recognize that last name, well then you know it wasn't good. The Nazarenos, Vicky and Tony, owned the painting in the early 80s. A source close to them spoke at length about the curse after they sold the painting. Quote, "We never heard about the supposed curse of the painting," the source said. "We never knew. Vicky especially is very superstitious. So if she had known, she wouldn't have allowed the purchase of the painting." They purchased it in 1981 and directly after closed one of their largest stores, a handicraft store on Roxas Boulevard. Then mysteriously, Tony got a swollen carotid artery, and doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong for months. The portrait hung in the Nazarenos' living room in Forbes Park for about a year, along with other paintings by famous Filipino artists. They were somewhat of collectors. And then the Nazarenos exhibited the painting at a big art show held at a hotel. Quote, "I think that was the place where Mrs. Marcos saw it, if I'm not mistaken," said the source. "She saw it, and I think she expressed her intention to buy it either from the Nazarenos or from the hotel. It was then seen hanging in the president's office. at Malacanang in 1983, the year Ninoy Aquino was murdered at the Manila International Airport, a moment many consider to be the beginning of the Marcos descent from power. It is said that for a time, it was in the home of Jaime Marcos, and it was during this period where she was supposed to have sadly suffered a miscarriage. It was then that Jaime's mother, Imelda Marcos, donated the painting to the National Museum of the Philippines. But the fun didn't quite stop there. The painting was exhibited in 1987 at the National Museum during a show featuring the paintings of Juan Luna and Felix Resurrección Hidalgo. On opening night, the spotlight for the portrait of a lady exploded. All the other lights were fine, except for that one particular painting. Mi Novia still hangs at the National Museum today. And there you have it. The incredibly strange story of a cursed painting, which is more honestly an all too familiar story about real life people who made some terrible decisions that ultimately led to two women losing their lives. The remainder of Juan Luna's life was albeit short, since he also died young, but in my opinion, he was allowed to go about his business, like he hadn't murdered two of his own family members. However, maybe there was a curse. Maybe in his head, what the prosecuting attorney said was accurate, and he couldn't escape the echo of killer of women, murderer, throughout his remaining years. Only Juan Luna would have been able to confirm if that curse was real. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you found it informative and entertaining. The facts and details I included were the ones that were reported across multiple sources, so I feel they would have been the most accurate. As always, when diving into older historical cases, some of the information is jumbled in translation or simply reported wrong. I tried my best to stick to the known facts, despite coming across many sources that reported completely wrong information confidently, such as Bibi dying in childbirth, which is completely untrue since there is photographic evidence of her as a toddler, or that Luna killed both Felix and Trinidad, which is laughable since how could they speak at his trial if they were both dead? So anyway, thank you for spending a little time with me today. Please like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel like doing so. I would love to hear your thoughts on this story down below. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye! Also, in case you are wondering, yes, as always, my companion is sleeping soundly in the chair behind me while I film this video. Hi, Stella. You know, she had a rough time helping me put this video together, so, you know, she needs her rest. And my other little companion, as always, is hanging out over there in the chair, sleeping away, just like usual.